I'm Lucas Tran, 34 professor of English literature. The first time I saw her name on the class roster, my chest locked up like a fist had closed around it. Maya Delacroix, the daughter of the man who used to call me lucid loser in the high school parking lot, who once snatched my sketchbook and tossed it onto the roof for laughs. His voice haunted the corners of my memory like a flickering hallway light. And now his daughter was sitting in my 10 a.m. seminar front row, pink notebook, legs crossed, oblivious to it all. But none of that mattered today. Today, I was at the annual university award ceremony, where every department honored its most inspiring faculty members. The room was awash of navy gowns, silk ties, and plastic flutes of champagne. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the East Quad, where the magnolias had just begun to bloom. My name tag was spelled correctly this year. That was a small miracle. I stood near the back, alone, holding a folded program and wondering whether I should have worn a different tie. The gold one made me look too eager. A few professors nodded politely as they passed, but no one stopped to chat. Near the podium, I spotted Dean Holloway speaking to a tight group of donors and trustees. A younger woman with camera-ready blonde waves leaned into him with a glass of white wine. They laughed. At what? I couldn't hear. I was reaching for a canapé when I heard it. "Oh, sorry, this area's for faculty and guests," said a clipped voice beside me. I turned to see an event staff member, clipboard in hand, watching me like I'd wandered in from the janitor's closet. I smiled. "I'm faculty." She blinked, clearly doubting. "Do you have a seat assignment?" I nodded. "Yeah, table 4, English department." "Right." She glanced at her clipboard and then looked past me, eyes already searching for someone more important. "Just try not to stand near the presentation area. It'll get crowded." She moved on. I took a step back. Suddenly, the silk tie itched against my neck. I folded the program tighter in my hand until it creased. I'd taught here for 6 years. I'd published 3 papers in peer-reviewed journals, won a teaching award, had 2 students write me unsolicited thank you letters that made me cry into my cereal. But to her, I was another nobody with a name tag and a face she didn't recognize. And maybe I was. If you've ever been mistaken for the help at your own job, or if someone ever looked through you like you didn't belong, drop a comment or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if family drama ever made you feel invisible too. The room dimmed slightly. Music faded. Dean Holloway stepped to the microphone, clearing his throat with that signature throat pop that always preceded long speeches. "We are thrilled to recognize this year's distinguished educator, whose students described him as life-changing, gentle, and my favorite, the reason I didn't drop out." Chuckles rippled through the audience. He began his academic journey in the humblest of places, a local community college, where he paid for tuition by tutoring other students in the library. "Please help me welcome." There was a pause. "Professor Lucas Tran." For a moment, I didn't move. Then came the wave of heads turning, that subtle shift like someone had tilted the floor just slightly. Eyes widened. Whispers flitted like moths from one table to another. "Lucas," I heard someone mutter. "The guy from English Lit." I stepped forward. As I passed the blonde woman who had spoken to the dean earlier, I noticed her brows knit together. She was Maya's mother. I remembered her now from the parent-teacher nights, always in lipstick too red for the occasion, asking the art teacher if sketching was even a real class. She was gripping the stem of her wine glass like it might slip. When I reached the stage and accepted the plaque from Dean Holloway, the applause came in rolling waves, delayed, but strong. A few stood. I saw Maya at the front of the audience, clapping slowly, mouth slightly parted, and then came the silence. The moment when no one knew exactly who I was anymore. The moment when all their assumptions crumbled. And they had to meet me again for the first time. I didn't drive straight home after the ceremony. I stopped by the little 24-hour cafe off Elm and Madison, where the booths were always slightly sticky, and the tea tasted faintly of dish soap. The waitress didn't recognize me, and that was comforting. I sat in the back corner with my plaque in my bag and my coat draped over the seat across from me like I was expecting company. I wasn't. I just needed silence. I kept hearing the applause, even though it had died hours ago, kept seeing Maya's face, how it folded in on itself when she saw me on that stage. I hadn't told anyone about the award. Not even my mom. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because I knew how it would go, she'd say she was proud. Then gently remind me that no award makes up for student debt or lonely nights or missed birthdays. Maybe she was right, but back in that ceremony room, when I stood behind the podium, gripping the sides like I'd fall without it, something flickered in me, like a match struck in a long dark tunnel. When I finally got home around midnight, I set the plaque on the kitchen counter and didn't touch it again for 3 days. The first time I met Maya Delacroix in class, she didn't recognize me. That wasn't a surprise. She was everything her father had probably hoped she'd be: polished, poised, pre-med with a double minor in psychology and ethics. Her handwriting curled neatly across her notes. Her questions were sharp and always well-timed, just after the room settled into silence. She was good. Too good. Honestly. I used to wonder whether he'd paid for some elite private coach to help her talk like that, like she'd already been published twice, and had her own TED Talk queued up. I tried not to hold it against her. Still, there was a day about 3 weeks into the semester when she lingered after class, waiting until the other students had left. She approached my desk slowly, biting the inside of her cheek. "Professor Tran." I looked up from my laptop. "Yes." She glanced behind her, making sure no one was listening. Did you go to Riverbend High School?" I felt my throat close for a second. "I did," I said. "Graduated class of 2008. She blinked. "You were in the same class as my dad." I nodded slowly. "Yes." She didn't say anything right away. Her eyes drifted to the edge of the desk, where a copy of the bell jar lay face down. Spine cracked. "I think he mentioned you once," she said. I almost laughed. "Just once." She gave a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "He said you were the artsy one, the quiet kid, always carrying around a sketchbook. That sounds about right." She hesitated. "He also said, you didn't finish college." I met her gaze. "A lot of people say a lot of things." "Maya." She flushed and looked away. "Sorry, that was rude." "No," I said. "It's fine. That's what this class is about. Isn't it? Questioning narratives? Starting over." That day, she left the room without saying another word. But something changed after that. She stopped sitting in the front row, started listening more than speaking. And once, I caught her looking at me like she was trying to understand something she couldn't name. I hadn't always planned to teach. After high school, I did go to community college. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't afford anything else. My dad had already disappeared by then, and my mom was waitressing double shifts just to keep the lights on. I worked nights at a warehouse, sorting boxes until my fingers went numb, then spent mornings half asleep in lecture halls filled with too much fluorescent light and too little encouragement. But I kept going. 1 semester turned into 2, 2 years turned into 4. I transferred to a state university, then grad school. I taught writing workshops in underfunded high schools and scribbled lesson plans on bus tickets. When I got my first adjunct position, I lived in a basement studio with silverfish and no Wi-Fi. I used the library for everything: lesson prep, research, even dating apps. No one clapped for me then. But I learned that clapping doesn't mean much when your purpose is real. There was a moment, a few weeks before the semester ended, when Maya stayed after class again. This time, she wasn't nervous. She walked right up to my desk and dropped a printed paper onto it. It was her final thesis proposal, Inherited Narratives and the Burden of Legacy. I skimmed the opening lines. They were raw, almost too raw. My father believes intellect is linear. You either rise above or stay behind. He never says this directly, but I've heard it in every story he tells, especially the ones about people who didn't meet his expectations. This essay is my attempt to understand the cost of that narrative on others, and on myself. I looked up. This is brave. She shrugged, suddenly quiet again. I figured, maybe it's time I write something that scares me. I gave her a nod. That's where the truth lives. She nodded, eyes shimmering. You know, he still doesn't know I'm in your class. I raised an eyebrow. I told him I was taking advanced rhetoric. I just didn't mention your name. You think he'd be upset? I think he'd be confused. She paused, then added, but he's not the one learning anything right now. A week after the awards ceremony, I was walking to my office when I saw Maya standing in the hallway, clutching a folder. Professor Tran. She called. Do you have a minute? I nodded and led her inside. She sat down across from me and exhaled slowly. My dad found out, she said. I tilted my head. About the class. About the award. I stayed quiet. He saw the photo in the alumni newsletter. Said, didn't think that guy amounted to anything. I winced. And what did you say? I told him, you're the best professor I've ever had. The silence between us stretched long and soft. I just thought you should know, she said, standing, that someone sees it, even if he doesn't. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Also, she added, I think I want to switch to English. Pre-med makes my head hurt. I smiled. You sure you're ready to write things that scare you? She grinned. I already did. The email came at 6:12 am. On a Monday. Subject line, Speaking Invitation State Honors Symposium. I clicked it twice just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. The message was short, direct, and baffling. Dear Professor Tran, we would be honored if you would deliver the keynote speech at this year's State Honors Symposium. Your recent recognition for excellence in teaching, along with your unique journey through higher education, deeply aligns with our theme, Rewriting the Narrative. Sincerely, Amelia Jensen Chair, SHS Committee. I stared at the screen, rereading it over and over, until the words blurred. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I stood in my cramped kitchen, poured black coffee into a chipped mug, and watched the steam rise like it had something to say. My apartment still smelled faintly of old books and microwave dinners. I hadn't changed the light bulb in the hallway for weeks. It flickered like a dying star every time I passed. And now someone wanted me to speak to a crowd, on a stage, about success. I thought of all the times I'd been talked over, the family reunions where I was asked, so what are you doing now, with that tone? Like they assumed the answer was still figuring it out. I thought of the Thanksgiving when Uncle Pete laughed and said, I give the kid 2 semesters before he's back here fixing lawnmowers. That was the last Thanksgiving I attended. Still, I wrote back. I said yes. The symposium was set for late spring, 3 months away. But the planning committee moved quickly. Amelia, the chair, asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss my personal arc. We met at a bookstore cafe filled with too many Edison bulbs and not enough chairs. She was in her early 50s, with wire-frame glasses and a scarf knotted too tightly around her neck. She had the kind of intensity that made you sit straighter. She ordered a chai. I got a cold brew, even though it was raining outside. So, she said, opening her notepad, your background is unusual. That's exactly why we want you. Most of our keynote speakers come from Ivy Leagues, but your story has grit. It resonates. I nodded cautiously. Do you mind if I ask? She continued. Was there a particular moment when you realized you didn't have to be who people thought you were? The question sat between us like a fog. I answered honestly. No moment. Just moments. A series of small humiliations that taught me how to build myself quietly. She paused. That's beautiful. It wasn't, I said. Not at the time. Back on campus. Things carried on as usual. Office hours. Grading. Emails from students asking for extensions that all sounded eerily similar. Maya submitted her final thesis. It was better than anything I'd seen from a sophomore. Her writing wasn't just smart, it was alive. There was one passage that stayed with me. Legacy is a mirror. Sometimes it reflects love. Sometimes it reflects fear. But it always shows you more than you ask to see. When I handed the paper back to her with a handwritten note, just one line, you saw it clearly. She looked down for a long time, then said, that means more than you know. About a month before the symposium, I got a call from my mother. She rarely called unless something was wrong. I answered with that half-panicked, half-annoyed tone children reserve for aging parents. Hey, everything okay? There was a long pause on the line. Then your cousin Amy sent me a video. Oh, it was of you. That award thing. I waited. You were standing on a stage, she said slowly. They were clapping for you. Like, really clapping. I let out a small breath. Yeah, that was a thing. Why didn't you tell me? I shrugged, forgetting she couldn't see me. I don't know. Felt weird. She paused again. You look like your father up there. I didn't know what to say to that. She continued. He'd be proud. Lucas, even if he never said it. He was never good with words. I almost laughed. That's ironic. She chuckled too. Then her voice turned soft. You're good with words. Always will. I swallowed hard. Thanks. Mom. I printed out the photo. Put it on the fridge. I blinked. Really, of course. I mean, it's not a wedding photo or a baby, but it's something. I laughed for real then. It's something. The day of the symposium arrived like a storm that had been gathering for years. I wore a charcoal suit, the same one I bought secondhand before my first conference in grad school. It still fit, barely. The event hall was modern, glass panel, flooded with soft light. A large screen displayed my name in bold letters next to the title of my talk, The Quiet Rewriter. I sat backstage, holding my speech in my lap, fingers tracing the edges of the pages. Professor Tran, a voice called. I looked up. A volunteer peeked in. You're on in 5. I stood, nodded, and walked slowly toward the curtain. My heart beat like a metronome in my throat, and just before I stepped out, I saw her, Maya, in the audience, second row, notebook in hand. She hadn't told me she was coming. I walked out into the light. The crowd stilled. I took the podium and breathed. My name is Lucas Tran, I began, and I was told, more than once, that I wouldn't make it past community college. A ripple of laughter, then quiet. But here I am, not because I proved anyone wrong, but because I stopped needing to. The silence deepened. I looked down at my notes, then back up. I used to think success would feel loud like applause or validation. But for me, it felt like a quiet room, a stack of essays, and a student who finally felt seen. I let that settle. I didn't grow up believing people like me belonged at podiums. I was too quiet, too artsy, too unsure. But I learned that even quiet people rewrite the narrative one sentence at a time. I saw Maya's eyes glisten, and for once, I didn't feel like a fraud. I felt whole. After the symposium, I didn't go to the reception. I walked past the clusters of congratulatory handshakes, past the hors d'oeuvres arranged like museum pieces, past the line of smiling committee members. I stepped out into the spring air alone. The clouds had broken open into a sky that looked washed clean. Everything smelled like wet concrete and possibility. I walked until I reached the parking garage, then sat on the cold stone ledge overlooking the city skyline. My hands were still trembling, not from nerves, but from something I couldn't name. The speech had gone well. People had clapped. Someone even shouted bravo, which felt more like something out of a play than a symposium. But it wasn't the applause that stayed with me. It was Maya, sitting there, watching me speak, scribbling something down in her notebook like she was memorizing the moment. There was something powerful about being witnessed by someone who once didn't know you existed, someone whose entire perception had shifted. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from an unknown number. "You made quite the impression up there. Didn't expect you to be so composed. G. D. Greg Delacroix." I stared at the message for a long time. Then, without typing a single word in response, I locked my phone and slid it back into my coat. 2 weeks later, Maya stopped by my office after class. She looked different, less polished. Somehow, like the guard she always wore had finally cracked. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. I gestured to the chair. "Always." She didn't sit right away. She hovered at the edge of the room, pacing slowly, her fingers toying with the edge of her sleeve. "My dad reached out to you, didn't he?" I nodded once. "He sent a text." "What did he say?" "Nothing much. Just that I made an impression." She snorted, folding her arms. "That's his way of saying he's threatened." I raised an eyebrow. "He only texts people when he wants to reestablish control. It's like his version of a handshake with claws." "That's poetic," I said. She gave a small smile. "I think I got it from you." Then, finally, she sat. "I wanted to say something," she said. "I've been thinking about it since the symposium." I waited. "My dad always told me that college was a means to an end, that you go to school to climb, to conquer, to win. He taught me how to argue but never how to listen, how to dissect an idea but never how to sit with one." She looked up at me. "Your class taught me how to sit with things, even when they were uncomfortable, especially then." I nodded slowly. "I changed my major last week," she said. "To English to truth," she said, grinning. "But yes, English." We sat in silence for a moment. A warm, companionable kind. "I'm proud of you," I said. She flushed, looked down. "You're the first person who said that and actually meant it." Later that month, I ran into her father. It was at a local fundraiser hosted by the Alumni Association. I hadn't planned to attend, but a colleague roped me into going last minute, promising it would be good networking. Greg Delacroix was exactly how I remembered him, broad-shouldered, too loud, and dressed like he was auditioning for a Wall Street documentary. He spotted me across the room and made a beeline before I could slip away. "Well, if it isn't Professor Tran," he said, holding out a hand like it was a game we were both pretending to enjoy. I shook it briefly. "Greg. Heard you wowed them at the symposium. Even got quoted in the state education newsletter. Quite the celebrity these days." "Huh? Not quite," I said. "Just trying to do the work." He chuckled, too loudly. "Well, good for you. It's nice to see the underdog win one." There it was. The backhanded compliment, the sugar-laced dig. I felt a flicker of old anger, the kind that used to coil in my stomach like smoke. But I didn't let it rise. I wasn't trying to win. I said, calmly, I was just trying to become someone I could live with. That made him pause. He cleared his throat. Maya says you've been a good influence. She's stubborn, needs strong guidance. She doesn't need guidance. I said, she needs freedom. He blinked. I stepped a little closer, lowering my voice just enough. And she's finding it now. Whether you understand that or not. He looked at me for a long moment, then gave a tight smile and walked away. His glass of bourbon still half full. I didn't watch him go. By the end of the semester, Maya had submitted a full-length short story for her independent study. It was brutal and beautiful. A fictionalized account of a daughter watching her father from behind a veil of silence, half memoir, half dream. She'd called it The Echo Room. I read it 3 times before I gave her feedback, and when I handed it back, I told her the truth. This could be published. She didn't react right away. Then she said, softly, I wrote it in one night. After the fundraiser, I nodded. It just poured out. I think I finally stopped trying to protect him in my head and started telling the truth. That's where the real writing begins. I said. She stood then, slinging her bag over her shoulder. At the door, she paused. Professor Tran, yes. I hope you never stop teaching. You don't just explain literature, you live it. I felt something shift in my chest. Thank you, Maya. She left, and for the first time in a very long time, I sat alone in my office and let myself cry. Summer came. The campus emptied out, and the halls grew quiet. I didn't teach a summer course. I needed the stillness. I cleaned out my bookshelves, finally replaced that flickering light bulb, and started writing again. Not lectures, not essays, something for myself. I began a manuscript half memoir, half reflection, tentatively titled The Quiet Rewrite. It started with a boy holding a sketchbook on a rooftop, wondering if his voice would ever matter. And it ended with a student choosing her own. By the time the fall semester rolled around again, I was ready. Not in the way I usually was, syllabus printed, office hours posted, lecture slides color-coded. That part never changed. What felt different this time was the stillness inside me. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was solid, anchored. I walked into the lecture hall on the first day of the new term, just like I had a dozen semesters before. The room still smelled faintly of whiteboard markers and institutional carpet. The projector flickered like an old film reel warming up. But this time, I didn't feel like I had something to prove. I glanced around the room as students trickled in. New faces, nervous ones. A boy in the back row kept adjusting his hoodie like he wanted to disappear into it. A girl in the front clutched a color-coded binder and didn't make eye contact. I recognized those postures. I'd worn them myself. And then, one seat to the left of Center Maya. She wasn't taking the class. Of course. She'd aged out of intro-level courses, but she sat in for the first day anyway, smiling when our eyes met. She mouthed the word, support. I gave her a half nod. We began. That semester moved fast. Students asked good questions. Some asked terrible ones, which I welcomed just as much. I encouraged them to write poorly, loudly, honestly, to mess up on purpose, to stop trying to sound like someone smarter. I started leaving more handwritten comments on essays, not just about syntax and theme, but about feeling, memory, voice. I underlined lines that made me pause, circled words that carried weight. There was one student, Amir, who couldn't look anyone in the eye, but turned in a paper about grief that read like a confession. I called him in after class one day. I think you have something real here. I told him. He blinked. You do? I nodded. It's raw. But that's good. Don't sand down the edges yet. He looked down. My mom says writing's a waste of time. I leaned forward. Your mom's not in this room. You are. He nodded slowly, and for the first time, I saw his shoulders lift a little. One Thursday afternoon, I got a knock on my office door. It was Maya again. She looked more settled now, like someone who'd finally unpacked a suitcase she didn't realize she was carrying. I brought something, she said, sliding a file folder onto my desk. Inside was a printed manuscript. The Echo Room, it said, with her name listed below. I submitted it to a literary journal, she said. They accepted it. Full publication in winter. I smiled, stunned but not surprised. I wanted you to be the first to know. I'm honored, I said. And proud. She hesitated, then added. They asked for a short author's bio. I put in a line that said, this story was born in a class taught by a professor who reminded me that silence is still a language. That hit harder than I expected. I had to look away for a second. Thank you, I said. No, she replied softly. Thank you. That winter, during break, I went back to my hometown. I hadn't been there in years. The place was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I was just taller now. Not physically, but in a way that couldn't be measured in inches. I drove past Riverbend High. The school was getting a new roof. The football field looked more tired than triumphant. I parked in front of the old community library, the one where I used to spend hours hiding in the poetry aisle, copying lines into a notebook because I couldn't afford to check the books out. Inside, not much had changed. Same dusty corners, same whisper-soft air. A woman at the desk smiled and said, "Help you find something?" I shook my head. "Just revisiting." She tilted her head. "You look familiar. Did you go to school around here?" I nodded. "Riverbend." "Ah," she said. "Lots of smart kids came through there." I smiled, but didn't say anything. Before I left town, I stopped at my mother's apartment. She still lived in the same place. Same creaky elevator, same peeling wallpaper. Her fridge had more magnets than space. And right there, dead center, was that photo of me on stage at the symposium, tucked between an expired coupon and a postcard from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "I see you're still famous," she joked when she noticed me staring at it. I rolled my eyes. Hardly. We sat down at the tiny kitchen table with mugs of lukewarm tea. She reached over and patted my hand. "You know, I never really understood what you did." I raised an eyebrow. "Thanks." "No. I mean..." She paused. "Searching. I knew you taught, but I didn't get it. Until recently." "What changed?" She smiled softly. "One of your old students sent me a letter. Said you saved her life. Said your class made her feel seen for the first time." My throat tightened. "Who?" She shook her head. "Didn't leave a name. Just said she found my address through a mutual connection and wanted me to know what kind of son I raised." I stared at her. "You kept it." She stood and pulled open a drawer, rifling through old receipts and takeout menus. Then she handed it to me. The handwriting was small, but neat. At the bottom, M.D. Maya. I folded the letter gently, like something sacred. "Thank you." I said, "No," she replied. "Thank you." That spring, I submitted the first chapters of The Quiet Rewrite to a small press that specialized in educator memoirs. I didn't expect much. 3 weeks later, they called. "We'd love to publish this," the editor said. "It's quiet, but it's powerful, and it needs to be heard." I said yes, not because I needed validation, but because I wanted others like me to find something familiar in the pages, a map back to themselves. At the final class of the semester, I stood before my students and read aloud the first page of the manuscript. I didn't tell them it was mine. I just read. When I finished, a girl in the back said, "That made me feel like crying, and I don't even know why." I smiled. That means it worked. As they left the room, several stayed to shake my hand. A few just nodded, shy smiles on their faces. Amir slipped me a folded note that said, "I changed my major. It's not medicine, but it's me." I sat alone in the room for a while after they left. The walls were quiet again. But this time, the silence felt full. Summer crept in gently that year. Quiet mornings, open windows, the kind of heat that lulled everything into stillness. I didn't travel, didn't take on extra courses. I stayed and wrote. The manuscript grew slowly, like a tree learning how to shape itself in the wind. Some days I stared at the page for hours. Others, the words spilled fast, whole memories coming back in flashes, the sound of my mother weeping behind the bathroom door, the sharp stink of old textbooks, the burn of shame when a teacher once said, "You write well for someone like you." I wrote it all, without flinching. The small press had sent back edits, gentle ones, respectful. They wanted to keep the tone raw. "Don't polish the pain," the editor had written. "Let it breathe." So I did. I breathed with it. One late July morning, I got a knock on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Maya stood there. She held up 2 iced coffees like a peace offering. "Thought maybe you needed a break." I laughed. "From what? From yourself?" She said. "Writers forget to step outside." She wasn't wrong. I let her in. She sat cross-legged on my floor, like she belonged there. We talked about her internship at a literary magazine, about how she'd learned to spot hollow metaphors and had started rejecting work from men twice her age without flinching. "They hate it," she said, grinning. One guy replied with a 5-paragraph email about how I was clearly too young to understand nuance. I raised my glass. To being underestimated. She clinked hers against mine. To outgrowing expectations. We sat in silence for a while after that. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, just resting. Then she said something I didn't expect. "Do you ever think about leaving teaching? Academia. The system." I looked around my apartment, at the stacks of books, the paper drafts, the wall calendar filled with sticky notes. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I don't think I'd know who I was without it." She nodded. "I used to think I'd be a doctor, that if I saved enough people, maybe I'd feel whole." And now she looked at me. "Now I just want to tell the truth. Even if it breaks people's expectations." I smiled. "That's scarier than surgery." She laughed. "Yeah, but I think I like scary now." That fall, the quiet rewrite was released. There was no big book tour, no viral reviews, just a small launch party at a local bookstore, where the folding chairs wobbled and the wine was poured from a box. Still, the place was full. Former students, colleagues, my mother, who wore her best blouse and brought cookies in a tin she insisted was just in case they forgot dessert. Even Greg Delacroix showed up. I spotted him near the back, arms crossed, unreadable. I didn't acknowledge him, not out of spite, but because this night wasn't about him. It was about me, about the quiet kid with the sketchbook, about the professor who once doubted whether anyone would listen, about every student who'd ever written something honest and been told it wasn't enough. When I stepped to the mic, the applause was warm, but not deafening. I liked that. It felt human. I read a few passages. People laughed in the right places. A few dabbed their eyes. My mother didn't stop smiling once. When it was over, I signed copies with a borrowed pen. My name looked strange in print. Not bad, just surprising. Maya came up last. She handed me her copy, already bookmarked and underlined. You wrote the book I didn't know I needed, she said. I signed her copy with a single sentence. Keep rewriting. Winter came fast that year. The city felt quieter, slower. The book didn't become a bestseller. It didn't win any awards. But I started receiving letters. Not emails, handwritten letters. From teachers, students, strangers. One said I read it in one sitting, then cried for 2 hours. Thank you for reminding me that failure is not a prophecy. Another wrote, I gave up on school at 19. I'm 42 now and thinking of going back. Your words made me believe I'm still allowed. I kept every letter, not because they fed my ego, but because they were proof. Proof that the quiet mattered, that it echoed. I was walking across campus one gray January afternoon when I heard someone call my name. It was Amir. He was wearing a thick coat, a scarf wrapped up to his nose. Professor Tran. I stopped. He jogged to catch up. I just wanted to say, he said, panting slightly, I got into the creative writing program. I grinned. Congratulations. They said my essay was unapologetically vulnerable. That's how they put it. I believe it. He looked down. I almost didn't apply. But you did. He nodded. Because of you. Then he did something I'll never forget. He reached into his coat pocket and handed me a folded napkin. On it, scribbled in shaky pen, was a single sentence. Your words taught me how to hear my own. I didn't speak. I just nodded. He smiled and walked away. That night, I sat alone in my apartment again. Same desk, same lamp, but everything felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just truer. I picked up a fresh notebook and opened to the first page, and I wrote. They said I'd never make it past community college. They were right. I didn't just make it past. I built a road behind me for others to follow. I paused, then kept writing. Spring bloomed with unexpected momentum, the kind that crept in quietly and then suddenly filled every corner of your day's book talks, student meetings, interview requests, alumni panels. I was still teaching, still grading essays scribbled in the margins, still hosting office hours where half the conversations were about literature and the other half about life. But now, there was something else woven into it all. Recognition, not the spotlight kind, not awards or headlines, but the steady, quieter kind nods from strangers in the hallway. Bookstore staff who'd ask, You're that professor? Right before handing me a coffee on the house. Emails from people I'd never met who said things like, Your story sounded like mine. It was strange, not uncomfortable, exactly. Just new. I still lived in the same apartment, still forgot to replace my bath mat, still reheated leftovers in the microwave at 11 p.m. on grading nights. I still called my mother every Sunday and listened as she updated me on her neighbor's cat and how the soup at the church potluck wasn't seasoned correctly. But something inside me had shifted. I no longer walked into rooms trying to prove I belonged. I simply walked in. One Friday, I was asked to speak at a high school an hour outside the city. A former student, now a teacher herself, had arranged the visit. Your book's part of the senior reading elective, she said over the phone. They're obsessed with it. They even started calling their essays quiet rewrites. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When I arrived at the school, I was struck by how much it resembled my own cracked blacktop. Lockers that looked like they hadn't been repainted in decades, that faint, familiar smell of pencil shavings and teenage sweat. The auditorium was packed. Kids leaned forward in their seats, wide-eyed and too caffeinated. I told them about failure, about loneliness, about how I used to hide my writing under the mattress because I was scared someone would laugh. No one laughed. When the Q&A came, one student stood up nervous, fidgeting, barely making eye contact. He asked, "What do you do when people stop believing in you?" The silence that followed was thick. I answered carefully, "You learn to believe in yourself louder than their doubt." He nodded, sat down, and I saw something change in his posture, like he'd found a new way to carry his spine. After the talk, I stayed to sign books and pages torn out of notebooks. One girl handed me a piece of lined paper with a poem scribbled across it. She said, "I wrote this after reading your chapter on invisibility." I read the first line. They called me quiet like it was an insult, so I made silence into a mirror. It stopped me cold. "You're a writer," I said. She grinned, all braces and bright eyes. I know. Back at the university, things moved on as they always did. Committee meetings, paper deadlines, the endless churn of semesters. Maya had graduated that spring with honors. She'd accepted a research position with a publishing house in Chicago and left campus with a wave and a suitcase full of dreams. Before she left, she mailed me a package. No return address, just my name in looping handwriting. Inside was a first edition copy of The Bell Jar, wrapped in brown paper. Tucked inside the front cover was a note. "For the professor who taught me how to write without permission, keep making space for us." I kept the book on my desk, spine facing out. Students often picked it up and asked, "Is this the real one?" And I always said yes, because it was that summer. The university offered me a full professorship. I remember staring at the letter on my desk for a long time. The title felt strange. Professor. Full. As if I'd finally filled something that had always felt just slightly empty. I accepted. Not for the title, not for the pay bump, but because it meant I could stay and keep building something bigger than myself. The day it was announced, I walked into my lecture hall and found a bouquet of wildflowers on the desk. No note, just a single post-it with a quote scribbled in pencil. "They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds." I didn't need a signature. I knew. Later that year, I was invited to a dinner hosted by the dean, one of those formal affairs where people wear uncomfortable shoes and pretend to enjoy salmon that's been sitting out for too long. I wasn't going to go, but I did. I sat at the far end of a long, candle-lit table between a chemistry professor and an alumnus who donated a new wing to the library. Halfway through the meal, someone tapped my shoulder. I turned to see a man in his 50s, salt and pepper hair, sharp blazer, an expression I couldn't quite read. "I just wanted to say," he began, "my daughter was in one of your classes, Maya Delacroix." I froze. "I'm her father," he said. "Greg." "Of course. I know," I said quietly. He paused. "She talks about you a lot. Says you changed how she thinks." I didn't respond. He cleared his throat. "We didn't always see eye to eye, she and I, but she's stronger than I ever gave her credit for. I think that's because of you." Still, I stayed quiet. He looked down at his wine. "Anyway, thank you for helping her become her." Then he walked away. I sat there, heart pounding, unsure what to feel. Vindication, forgiveness. Maybe just closure. Maybe that was enough. The next morning, I got an email from Maya. Subject line: "Funny story. Inside, Dad texted me at 2 a.m. Said he met you. Said you held your dignity like armor. I don't know what you said to him, but he sounded different. Thought you'd want to know." I stared at the screen, smiling. Then I replied, "Didn't say much. Just listened. Sometimes that's all it takes." She wrote back with a single line: "Just like you taught me." It was raining the day I returned to the community college. Not for a lecture, not for a guest panel, just for myself. I hadn't stepped foot on that campus in over a decade. Yet the sidewalk still curved the same way, the gutters still flooded at the same turns, and the vending machines still carried the same stale granola bars. No one recognized me. That felt right. I walked past the library windows and remembered the nights I used to press my forehead to that glass after a long shift, waiting for the custodian to unlock the door so I could get a few hours of study in before my first class. There were newer benches now, a sculpture in the quad that hadn't been there before, abstract, angular, something about hope and rebirth. I sat on a bench across from the admin building and watched as students rushed between classes, soaked hoods pulled tight, backpacks thudding against their shoulders. I wondered how many of them were holding their lives together with duct tape and dreams, just like I once did. I pulled out my notebook, not my laptop, not a phone, just a battered spiral bound I kept in my bag, half filled with grocery lists and scratched-out thoughts. I wrote, "Every story that begins with doubt has the potential to end in truth. You don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to keep speaking." I wasn't planning on sharing it, but it felt good to get it down. A few days later, I received a message from the college's department head. She'd heard I'd visited. A former professor had spotted me sitting near the old quad. "We'd be honored," she wrote, "if you'd consider coming back for our student speaker series. You could inspire a lot of people." I hesitated. Then I said yes. The room wasn't big. It held maybe 40 chairs, mismatched and too close together. The projector buzzed overhead. The air smelled of old coffee and chalk dust. I stood in front of a group of students who looked just like I once did, half awake, skeptical, guarded. "I'm not here to tell you how to succeed," I began. "I'm here to tell you that your life doesn't end here. It begins here." A boy in the front row, hood up, eyes down, glanced up for the first time. I was told. I continued. That community college was the ceiling, that I should be realistic, that dreaming beyond this place was naive. I looked around. I wasn't naive. I was just beginning. A girl raised her hand. "How do you keep going when nobody believes in you?" I smiled. You stop waiting for them to believe, and you start writing the story anyway. That afternoon, as I packed up, a student approached. He wore a faded hoodie with ink stains on the sleeves. "Professor Tran," he asked, hesitant. I don't even know if I'm going to stay next semester, but your talk." He looked down. It made me think maybe I'm not as alone as I feel. I nodded. "You're not." He reached into his pocket and handed me a folded paper. "It's something I wrote. I haven't shown anyone." I took it carefully. "I'll read it." He nodded, then left without another word. I unfolded the page once I got outside. The first line read, "I didn't know silence could sound like survival." I stood under the rain, holding that paper like a relic. Later that week, I received an envelope in the mail. Thick cardstock, embossed seal, an invitation. The university was holding its annual convocation, and I'd been nominated to deliver the closing address. This wasn't a teaching award. This was faculty-wide. Acknowledgement from the very institution that once couldn't pronounce my name correctly at department meetings. I accepted. Not to prove anything, but to mark a chapter. To say I was here. Convocation day arrived bright and windless. Students filed into rows in long black robes, gold tassels catching the light. Parents wept. Staff beamed. I stepped onto the stage, took the podium, and breathed in the moment. "Some of you were told you wouldn't make it here," I began. "Maybe by teachers, maybe by family, maybe by that voice in your own head." I know I was. I saw nods ripple through the crowd. But here's the truth. The people who doubt you are often just narrators of their own fear. You don't have to inherit that. I paused. You're allowed to rewrite the ending. A burst of applause rose before I even stepped away. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to shrink when people clapped. I stood still and let it happen. That night, I sat on my balcony with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and a mug of tea cooling in my hands. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, whole. I thought of the girl who wrote poems about mirrors, the boy who folded his grief into essays, the students who showed up every day even when their lives were unraveling off campus. I thought of the child I used to be, drawing in the margins of worksheets, terrified someone would ask him to read aloud. And I whispered to that version of me, "You made it." Not because I stood at a podium, but because I stayed when it was easier to disappear. Because I listened when no one else did. Because I became the professor I once needed. I didn't become famous, didn't get rich. But one day, while walking through the quad, a student stopped me. He looked nervous, young, voice shaking. "Are you Professor Tran?" "I am." He exhaled. "My sister said you changed her life. She told me. You made her feel like her voice mattered." I smiled. "What's her name?" "Maya," he said, and the world tilted, just slightly. I nodded. "She changed mine too." We stood in silence, then I turned and kept walking. The path beneath me was familiar, but the person walking it, he was no longer the boy they said wouldn't make it. He was the man who did, and he was just getting started.